Do you have nice round cannonball delts? Like they're super full and nice and spherical? See, most people don't. Most people have delts that are kind of big towards the front, but then they taper off down towards the back. And that's true even for bodybuilders. I'm looking at a study here that found that bodybuilders have front delts that are on average 5 times bigger than sedentary people. The lateral deltoids are 3 times bigger, and the rear deltoids are only 15% bigger. Now, I think this is an extreme example based on the research I've seen, but it is true that many people have very overpowering front delts. And in this video, I'm going to explain why I think that is and how to design your training programs so that you don't get this issue and you can build nice round cannonball delts. And I'm going to start by looking at a new study on this in competitive bodybuilders that I think nicely illustrates the central principle, which is moving too much in the sagittal plane. Let's dive into the study to let me explain. The study is called Front versus Back and Barbell versus Machine Overhead Press, an electromyographic analysis and implications for resistance training. So basically what this team of Italian researchers did is they looked at the behind the neck versus the front standard barbell overhead press, and also the machine overhead press more towards the back and more towards the front. This was done in competitive bodybuilders, so it's a very relevant population, and then they measured the muscle activity based on a specified percentage of their 1RM, which was tested for each exercise. And then they looked at how active were all the involved muscles during the exercise. So let's look at the EMG data. Here you can see the EMG data for all the muscles that they measured. So the front deltoid, the side deltoid, which is incorrectly referred to as the medial deltoid here. Even researchers commonly make this mistake. There is no such thing as a medial deltoid. There is only the lateral deltoid. Medial refers to towards the midline of the body. Lateral means towards the outside. So there is only a lateral deltoid, but it's a common mistake even for exercise scientists. Then we have the posterior deltoid, the pectoralis major, the chest, the upper traps, and the triceps. So let's start with the anterior deltoid. Basically, I would say there is no difference between the different exercises. So it's roughly the same. With EMG, you don't want to read too much into minor patterns. And I think you generally want to err on the side of looking at the ascending phase. Here, the concentric. And in there we see very little difference. So this is the front barbell military press. This is the back barbell military press. So it's behind the neck. This is in front of the neck towards the chest, towards the clavicle. And this is the front machine press. And this is the back machine shoulder press. So overall, I would say not much difference. The front delts are going to be activated no matter how you perform the exercise. Now the medial, or rather the lateral deltoid, actually does have a big difference. Clearly the back barbell military press here is the clear winner, with not that much clear difference between the other exercises. The machine in this case did particularly poorly, which is because it was very much towards the front, so it was almost more like an incline press. So basically the trend here clearly is that the behind the neck military press is the best for the side delts, and not much of a downside for anything else so far. So for the posterior deltoid, again, the back behind the behind the neck military press is the clear winner. And if we look at the pattern from front to back for the machine, it's again the same. And also for the medial deltoid here, it's kind of the same. The pattern for all of these is that if you move more towards the back, so you move the elbow more towards the back of the body, you activate the posterior and the side deltoids more, which of course makes perfect sense, because the lateral deltoids are primarily shoulder abductors. They move the elbow up and out towards the side. The posterior deltoids will only be involved if the elbow is, or only significantly involved if the elbow is quite far back. So here, pattern clearly, again, is the more you move the elbow towards the back, the more you shift the stress on the shoulders towards the side and rear deltoids. Now for the pecs, the winner was clearly the front, whether it was machine or barbell, and the pattern is that you deactivate the pecs when you move the elbow back, which of course also makes perfect sense. The upper pecs actually help the anterior deltoids, so the front of the shoulders, with shoulder flexion. And the more you move the elbow back, the more you perform abduction, the less you involve the pecs. Now for the traps, there really wasn't any notable difference. The pecs in general, like you can see, the percentage of max is only about 50%. Overhead pressing is not a very great exercise for the upper traps. That's a topic for a different discussion, but you will grow the traps to some extent with overhead pressing, but not nearly as much as with, say, wide or overhead shrug variations. And then for the triceps, again, not much of a difference. Overall trend here makes perfect biomechanical sense. The front delts, they are shoulder flexors, so they do this, and the upper pecs are essentially helpers of the front delts. Now the side delts, the lateral delts, they move the arm out to the side. They perform shoulder abduction. And then the rear deltoids, they actually mainly move the elbow back, so they're mainly involved as stabilizers and not so much as active movers. So you're not going to activate them to a great deal, but the only way you're going to activate them reasonably well is if you move the elbow very much back. And in general, what the movement pattern that you want from an overhead press, if you're training for round delts and emphasizing the side and the rear delts, is a pattern like this, which is what you typically get with a behind the neck overhead press. And that's why we get the results of this study. Most people though, when they do an overhead press, they're doing it towards the front and they have their elbows in front of their body. And as a result of that, you're going to heavily emphasize the front delts. And most people do a lot of front delt work. All the bench pressing you do, all the pecs, everything you do for the pecs pretty much is also going to train the front delts. And then if you do your overhead pressing, also with an emphasis on the front delts, with the elbows in front of the body, then you are going to massively overtrain the front delts and neglect the side and rear delts, which is going to result in a pattern that most people have, where their front delts are overdeveloped and they kind of taper off down towards the back rather than being nice and round. To help you build those nice round cannonball delts, here are 4 concrete tips. First, the obvious solution based on these studies would seem to be to do the behind the neck overhead press. However, it's very hard on the shoulder for many people. In fact, many people can't even get into the position. I myself also, it's really uncomfortable for me to even try to get in the position. My experience is that mostly Olympic weightlifters and women can actually get into the position reasonably well. Many men can barely even do it. Like they have to slack their wrists, they have to move their head forward, which is also uncomfortable, where they have to kind of hunch over and they're like this. It's not a great position for shoulder health for most individuals. Many people experience shoulder pain when doing this exercise. So if that's not you and you love the behind the neck overhead press with a barbell, it feels great on your shoulders, by all means do it, then it's a great exercise. For most people though, I prefer dumbbells. Dumbbells allow you to be completely like this, so really focus on getting the elbows out towards the sides and move laterally rather than have the elbows up and move more in the sagittal plane. This is the sagittal plane. The frontal plane, you want to move more in the frontal plane. Dumbbells are perfect for that, and the research actually finds, here's another study on this, on EMG analysis, similar to the previous study, where they found that dumbbells result in higher muscle activity than a barbell, which makes sense because especially for the lateral deltoid, you can simply move more in the plane of shoulder abduction. They also found, which is the second tip I would like to give you, that you should stand, don't sit. Standing allows your body to have a much more natural movement pattern, allows great freedom of the scapulae, your shoulder blades, whereas if you're seated, your shoulder blades are stuck at the bench. Moreover, most people, when they sit, they are actually kind of doing an incline press, like they don't sit fully upright, but they're sitting slightly like this, and then it becomes a high incline press, and the movement is like this, whereas you want the movement to be like this. I think that for almost all intents and purposes, it is better to stand and to use quite some dumbbells. If you do use a barbell, then tip number 3 I would give you is to use a wide grip. Many people go for the barbell with a relatively narrow grip and they try to do a military press and they think that military press means you should stand upright in military posture. That is not the case at all. And barbell overhead press, when properly done, means you have to move your head out of the way of the barbell. In this video here, you can see my overhead press technique with a barbell, and you can see that I'm actually really arched, my upper back is really arched, and that's what you should do because it allows me to keep my elbows way back. You can see that I'm keeping my elbows way back towards the rear, and they're moving very much in this plane, in the frontal plane. And I can do that because I'm moving my head out of the way of the barbell rather than moving the barbell forward. Many people, what they do is they kind of do this, like they think they have to stand up in military posture like this because it's called a military press, and then they move the barbell around the head. And this is obviously more of a front raise. It makes you a lot weaker, and it also puts the emphasis greatly on the front delts, which is not going to be ideal, again, if you already have overdeveloped front delts. Now, and then tip number 4 is that you want to program most of your deltoid work, in my estimation, for the lateral and the rear delts. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I would almost universally recommend against doing front raises. Front raises are a very popular exercise for most people in their shoulder day or shoulder workout, and I think they have no place in most programs because, as I said, you're hitting the front delts when you're doing flies, you're hitting them whenever you're doing any kind of overhead press. Lateral raises even still train them quite well. If you just count the volume per muscle group, then most people do so much more for the front delts than for the other heads of the delts, and that's the reason they are overdeveloped. In that sense, I like doing lots of lateral raises and rear delt work, rear delt raises, shoulder pulls, those kind of exercises, and doing your overhead press work, like I said, all really focused on dumbbells and or wide grip, either behind the neck if that suits you, or front barbell overhead pressing. Machines can work. I'm not a big fan of them. The shoulder is a very mobile joint, and most machines also have you sit. I think that for most people they result in pattern overuse issues and shoulder pain, because it doesn't allow the shoulder to move in a natural pattern, and it also, if the machine's not optimally designed for your structure, the very limited movement pattern often does not allow you to perform exactly the movement that we're aiming for here, which is very much shoulder abduction. Even during lateral raises, I would typically recommend that you bend over slightly forward, because you really want to enhance the lateral fibers. If you look at the deltoid fibers, they kind of go like this, like this, like this, and the movement that you're doing will be targeting the fibers that are best aligned for this purpose. The body typically recruits the fibers that have the best leverage the most. So if you're doing a front raise, then you're going to hit the front fibers. If you're doing a lateral raise, you're going to hit the side fibers. But if you're just doing a standard lateral raise, standing up straight like this, then this actually is still a lot of the front delt fibers. And research finds that about 75% of the force during a lateral raise is still, if we take 100% of the force from the lateral fibers, then the front fibers still produce 75% of that. So you're still actually training the front fibers, especially the more upper front fibers, a lot. So you want to lean over slightly and really focus on those more rear, more posterior lateral fibers and the true posterior fibers. I program for my clients and myself almost all of the deltoid work focused on the lateral and rear deltoids. The front delts, you really don't need to worry about them much because they're going to hit so much by all the exercises. I would say that mostly you want to do your shoulder work, actively avoiding training the front delts and really focusing on those side and rear delts. All right, I hope that helps you build more round, nice cannonball delts. And if you want more videos like this, then I'd be honored if you subscribe and like.